A letter arrived on a Thursday, and by Friday, Mercy Holt's life had already been sold. She didn't know that yet. She was standing at the kitchen window when her father came in from the barn, the envelope still in his hand, his face the color of old ash. He set it on the table without a word. She watched him pour himself a glass of water, drink it down, and pour another. That was how she knew it was bad. Her father, Silas Holt, was not a man who drank water when things were bad. He was a man who went very still. "Pa," she said. He didn't answer right away. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down heavily, like something inside him had already given up. The envelope sat between them. The return address was from a law office in Caldwell. "How much?" Mercy asked. He looked up at her then. She was 23 years old and had her mother's eyes, dark gray, the color of riverstone, and she had learned early that looking at a problem directly was better than looking away from it. 11,000, he said. The number sat in the kitchen like a third person. Mercy said nothing. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down and looked at the envelope she had not been invited to open. $11,000. The ranch had been mortgaged twice over. The cattle had been hit by fever the previous spring. The well on the east pasture had run dry in August. She had known the numbers were bad. She had not known they were that bad. "When?" she asked. "End of the month." She folded her hands on the table. Outside, the wind was moving through the cottonwoods along the creek, and the sound of it was the same sound it had always been, unchanged and indifferent. The ranch had belonged to her grandfather. Her mother was buried in the ground, behind the north fence. Mercy had been born in the bedroom at the back of the house. "There's a man," her father said. "He was not looking at her now. He was looking at the table. He came to see me last week, when you were in town." Mercy waited. "His name is Calloway, Owen Calloway. He runs the Broken Spur, up past the ridge. He's been running it alone since his wife passed." Silas Holt stopped, cleared his throat. He made an offer. She understood then. Not all of it, not the shape of it, but enough. "I told him I'd have to ask you." "You told him you'd ask me," she repeated. The words felt strange in her mouth, as if asking made it something other than what it was. "He'd clear the debt," her father said, "all of it, and he'd leave the deed to this land in your name. That was his condition. He was specific about it." Silas finally looked up at her. His eyes were red at the rims in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. "I told him I wouldn't do it any other way." Mercy stood up from the table. She walked to the window and looked out at the land. The dry grass, the fence posts leaning west from years of wind, the barn that needed a new roof she had been putting off since April. "How old is he?" she said. "He's 41. She was quiet for a long moment. "And what does he want?" Her father was quiet too. "A wife," he said finally. "A real one, that's what he said. He said he wasn't looking for an arrangement. He wanted someone to build something with." Mercy pressed one hand flat against the window frame. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun. "I'll meet him," she said. "Before I decide anything, I'll meet him." Owen Calloway came to the house on a Saturday morning, and the first thing Mercy noticed was that he didn't look like a man who needed anything. He was tall, with the kind of build that came from actual work rather than the posturing of it. Dark hair going silver at the temples. He took off his hat when he came to the door and held it in both hands, which was either good manners or a practiced performance of them. His eyes were a pale, clear brown, almost amber in certain light, and when he looked at her, there was something in them she couldn't immediately name. Not hunger, not calculation, something quieter. He sat at their table and accepted coffee and spoke to her father with the ease of a man accustomed to negotiating. But every time he answered a question, he looked at Mercy when he said it. Not her father, her. "The Broken Spur runs 1,200 acres, he told them. "I have 30 head of cattle, 2 good horses, and a contract with the rail depot in Caldwell that keeps the operation solvent through next year. I'm not offering charity." He said that last part directly to Mercy. "I'm offering a partnership. I want to be plain about that." "A partnership," she said, "with a marriage attached." "Yes." "Why?" The question seemed to interest him. He turned his hat once in his hands. "Because I'm 41 years old, and I've been running that ranch alone for 4 years, and I'm tired of doing it alone, and because." He stopped. "Because?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "Because I think you'd be good at it." She didn't know what she'd expected him to say. Not that. "You don't know me," she said. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. "I know more than you might think," he said quietly, and then he seemed to decide he'd said enough, because he looked back down at his coffee and said nothing more. She agreed to a 2-week consideration. He shook her father's hand, and then, before he left, he turned to Mercy and held out his hand to her as well. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief, and he let go first. She stood on the porch and watched him ride back up the ridge road, and she thought about what he'd said. I know more than you might think. She turned it over in her mind the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. She asked around. That was the practical thing to do. The woman who ran the dry goods in town, Margaret Pruitt, had known the Calloway family for 20 years. She told Mercy that Owen's wife, a woman named Louise, had died of pneumonia 4 winters back. He was devoted to her, Margaret said, wrapping Mercy's flower without being asked to. Came in every week for medicine when she was sick, stayed home with her, didn't send hired help, did it himself. She tied the parcel with brown twine. He's not an easy man, quiet, keeps to himself, but he's square. I've never heard a bad word from anyone who did business with him honestly. The banker in Caldwell, a thin man named Greer whom Mercy had met twice in her life, was more measured. He confirmed the debt figures. He confirmed the broken Spur's stability. He said, without being asked, that Owen Calloway had never once been late on a payment in 12 years. She rode out to the ridge on her own on a Wednesday, not to visit, but just to look. The broken Spur was set back from the road behind a line of old elms. The house was plain but well kept, whitewashed fence, a kitchen garden that had been tended recently, a barn in better repair than her own. She sat on her horse at the road for a while and looked at it. A man came out of the barn, and she thought for a moment it was Owen, but it was a hired hand, older, who didn't look in her direction. She rode home and sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee and tried to separate the things she felt from the things she was supposed to feel. There was fear. She was honest enough to name it. The fear of being bound to a stranger, the fear of leaving the only ground she'd ever known herself on. But underneath the fear, there was something else, something she examined carefully. The fact that when Owen Calloway had looked at her across the table, she had not felt like a transaction. She had felt strangely like a person being seen. She didn't know what to do with that. She said yes on the 14th day. She told her father at breakfast, and he looked at her for a long time before he nodded. His eyes were wet, and she looked away to give him a moment. I want the deed in my name, she said, like he offered. I want that in writing before anything else happens. Of course, her father said. And I want to keep my own horse. Her father almost smiled at that. I don't think he'll argue. He didn't. The papers were drawn up by the end of the week. The deed to the Holt land was transferred into Mercy's name. The debt was cleared. And, on a cold October morning, with only her father and Margaret Pruitt and the circuit preacher present, Mercy Holt became Mercy Calloway in the front room of the Broken Spur ranch house. Owen stood beside her in a clean, dark jacket. He said his vows in a steady voice. When the preacher pronounced them married, Owen looked at her and said quietly, just to her, I'll do right by you. Not as a performance, as a statement of fact, the same way he might say the weather was coming from the north. She believed him. She wasn't sure why, but she believed him. The first weeks were careful and quiet. They were polite to each other in the way of people navigating a new country, learning where the borders were. He rose before her and had the fire going by the time she came downstairs. She took over the kitchen without being asked, because it needed doing, and she was good at it, and he said nothing except thank you the first time she set a plate in front of him. He did not push. That was the thing she noticed most. He gave her the larger bedroom and took the smaller one off the hall without comment. He did not touch her. He asked her opinion about the cattle rotation, and when she gave it, he listened, actually listened, and twice in the first 2 weeks changed his plans based on what she said. She started to relax in small increments the way a fist uncurls on a warm day. One evening, she was in the kitchen after supper, reading a seed catalog by lamplight when he came in from outside and paused at the doorway. She looked up. There's something I want to tell you, he said. I've been trying to figure out how. She set down the catalog. He came to the table and sat across from her, the same way he'd sat the first day he came to her father's house. He turned his hat in his hands once, and then set it down. Do you remember the year your mother was sick? He said. Mercy went still. Her mother had died when Mercy was 15. It had been a long illness, almost 2 years. She hadn't known what this had to do with Owen. There was a drought that year, he said. Your father lost most of his summer crop. He asked my father for a loan. My father said no. He paused. 17. I thought that was wrong. So I took $40 from my own wages. I was working a cattle drive that summer, and I left it at your gate in an envelope with no name on it. Mercy stared at him. I didn't know you then, he said carefully. I knew of your family. But about a month after that, I rode past your property, and you were out by the fence, and you were reading to your mother. She was sitting in a chair, and you were reading to her out loud. I don't know what book it was. I was too far away. He stopped. I didn't forget it. The room was very quiet. The lamp burned steadily between them. My father mentioned the Holt place a few times over the years, Owen said. When I got older, I'd ask without letting on why. I knew about your mother passing. I knew about the cattle fever. I knew things were hard. He met her eyes. When the law office sent me that notice, they send notices sometimes, when properties are close to default and the owner might be open to offers. I knew whose land it was before I opened it. Mercy was quiet for a long time. You came because you knew it was mine, she said. Yes. For how long, she said. How long have you known about me? He was still looking at her steadily, that same clear amber gaze. Since I was 17, he said. That was 24 years. He had been 17. She had been an 8-year-old girl, reading to her dying mother beside a fence. Owen, she said, and she stopped because she didn't know what came after that. I'm not telling you this to make you feel something you don't feel, he said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what you're in. You deserve the full picture. He picked up his hat and stood. That's all. He went to bed. Mercy sat at the table for a long time, the seed catalog unopened beside her, the lamp burning low. She thought about the envelope at the gate. She had never known where it came from. Her father had called it a miracle from God and used it to buy medicine for her mother. Mercy had been 15 and she had believed in miracles then. She thought about a 17-year-old boy on horseback, too far away to hear the words she was reading, watching a girl take care of her mother beside a fence. She thought about what it meant to be seen, not for what you could offer, not for what you could be arranged into, but simply seen, the way light falls on something and makes it visible. Winter came hard that year, and they worked through it side by side. There were things that needed doing, always were, and Mercy discovered that she had opinions about the broken spur she hadn't known she had. She suggested moving the cattle to the south pasture before the worst of the cold hit, and she was right. She fixed the latch on the smokehouse that had been misaligned since Owen bought the place, and no one had gotten around to adjusting it. She started a second kitchen garden on the east side of the house, where the soil was better. Owen watched all of this with the quiet attention of a man who had learned how to pay attention. He didn't supervise. He didn't offer unsolicited corrections. When she made a mistake, and she made a few early on, unfamiliar with the particular rhythms of the broken spur, he said so plainly and without unkindness, and then helped her fix it. One evening in January, she came in from checking the water troughs to find him sitting at the kitchen table with a ledger book open, and an expression she'd come to recognize as trouble. What is it? She said, pulling off her gloves. Possible issue with the depot contract, he said. The agent's been replaced. New man wants to renegotiate terms. She sat down across from him. Let me see. He turned the ledger toward her. She read through the figures carefully. He waited, not speaking. If he's going to push for a lower rate, she said, you push back on the delivery timeline. He needs reliability more than he needs margin. The last supplier had late deliveries 3 seasons running. Make that argument. Owen looked at her for a moment, then he closed the ledger. That's exactly right, he said. It was such a simple thing. But she felt it, the particular satisfaction of being right in front of someone who was genuinely glad you were right. She started to understand slowly that this was what he had meant. A partnership. He had meant it literally. February brought a thaw, and then a freeze, and then a week of quiet, still cold that kept them mostly indoors. One night she couldn't sleep and came downstairs to find him in the armchair by the fire, with a book open on his knee and his eyes closed. Not asleep exactly, but resting. He opened his eyes when she came in. Couldn't sleep either? She said. Rarely do in February, he said. Something about the cold. She built up the fire a little and pulled the other chair close, and they sat together in the firelight for a while without speaking, which was a thing she had not expected to find comfortable with him, but had become gradually one of the most comfortable things she knew. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Did you ever think this would be strange, marrying someone this way? He was quiet for a moment. I thought it might be hard, he said. Strange. No, strange would be not trying. He looked at her. I've spent a long time knowing something was possible and not moving toward it. I'm not interested in doing that anymore. She looked at the fire. I was angry at first, she said. I want you to know that. Not at you specifically. Just at the situation, at being in a position where this was the best of the available choices. That's fair, he said. It's not as true anymore, she said. He said nothing, but his expression changed, very slightly, in the way she had learned to watch for, the small alterations that in another man would have been large ones. She went to bed that night and lay in the dark and acknowledged to herself, plainly and without drama, that she had crossed some invisible line she couldn't go back across. She was not sure exactly when it had happened. Sometime between the seed catalog and the ledger book, between the January silence and the February firelight, she had fallen in love with her own husband. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh into her pillow. Almost. In March, her father's health turned. It wasn't sudden. She had seen it coming in small signs. The way he moved more slowly, the shortness of breath when he walked the north fence, the color of his face in the evenings. She started driving out to the Holt place twice a week. Owen never asked her to explain. He rearranged his own work so that the days she was gone, the critical tasks were already handled. One afternoon, she came home from her father's, to find Owen had put up a second clothesline on the south side of the house that she'd mentioned wanting weeks ago, and had assumed he'd forgotten. He hadn't mentioned doing it, it was just there. She stood and looked at it for a moment. Then she went inside and put on the coffee, and thought about what it meant when someone listened to the small things you said, not because they were required to, but because you had said them. Her father improved in April, slowly but enough. It was Owen who said it first. She hadn't expected that. She had thought, when the moment came, if it came, that it would be her, finally admitting it out loud, finding the words, and handing them over like something fragile. But it was Owen, on a Sunday afternoon in late April, when they were walking the east fence line checking for winter damage. He stopped walking. She stopped too. "Mercy," he said. She looked at him. "I need to say something, and I'm going to say it plainly, because that's the only way I know how." He looked at her with that clear, direct gaze, the one that had unsettled her the first day and steadied her every day since. "I love you. I think I've been working toward that for a long time. And I know this started in the wrong order, the marriage before the knowing, but the knowing happened anyway, and I don't want to keep it to myself anymore." She looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved through the grass around them. Somewhere on the ridge, a hawk called once and went silent. "Owen," she said. "You don't have to." "I love you too," she said. "I've been trying to figure out how to say it for 2 months. Something happened in his face then, a releasing like a door swung open that had been shut a long time. He laughed quietly, almost to himself. She had not heard him laugh like that before. She thought she would like to hear it again. He reached out and took her hand, and she let him, and they stood there at the fence in the April light for a while, not needing to say anything more. The following fall, the Holt land and the broken Spur were run together, 2 adjacent properties, one operation, her name and his on the same deed. Her father moved into the smaller house when the seasons turned cold, close enough to visit, but far enough to be his own man still. He took his meals with them on Sundays. Mercy's kitchen garden had expanded to fill the entire east side of the house. Owen had replaced the barn roof, and she had helped him do it, climbing the ladder herself until he'd stopped suggesting she leave it to him because she'd ignored him. So consistently it became easier to hand her the nails. On a Thursday evening in October, close to a year from the day the letter had arrived, Mercy sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and looked at her husband across from her, reading his ledger book by lamplight, completely at ease, as if this were the exact place he was supposed to be. She thought about the girl at the fence. The book she'd been reading to her mother, she knew the title now, had found the memory of it. A collection of frontier poems, worn cover, her mother's name written inside the front page. She thought about the $40 in an unmarked envelope, and the boy who'd left it, and the 24 years between that moment and this one. She thought about the way love could travel a long distance quietly before it ever made itself known, how it could wait at the edge of a property line, patient as the seasons, until the door finally opened. Owen looked up from the ledger. He looked at her in that way he had, direct, unhurried, like she was something worth looking at. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. But she was smiling, and he could see that, and he smiled too, and went back to his book, and outside the wind moved through the elms along the creek, and the lamp burned steadily, and it was enough. I keep thinking about that unmarked envelope. $40 left at a gate by a 17-year-old boy, who had no obligation to leave it, who would get nothing in return for leaving it, who didn't even wait around to see what happened after. That's the detail I can't stop turning over, because it tells you everything about who Owen Calloway was before the story even begins, before Mercy, before the debt, before any of it. He saw something wrong, and he quietly did what he could to make it less wrong. No audience, no credit, just the act itself, and then he wrote on. I think about that when I think about what it means to actually have good character. Not the kind you announce. Not the kind that needs to be witnessed to feel real. The kind that shows up when nobody's watching and nothing is guaranteed, and you do the decent thing anyway, because not doing it would cost you something private that you can't explain to anyone else. Mercy had that too, in her own way. When her father set that envelope on the table and said the number out loud, $11,000, she didn't collapse. She didn't rage. She went to the window, looked at the land, and started thinking. She asked the right questions. She rode out to look at the broken spur on her own before she decided anything. She asked around town. She read the situation clearly and without the luxury of pretending it was something other than what it was. That kind of clear-eyed reckoning is hard. It requires a discipline that most people only develop after losing something they couldn't afford to lose. And then there was the matter of staying, of not letting fear be the loudest voice in the room. Mercy was afraid. She named it herself, honestly, which is its own kind of courage. But she separated the fear from the facts and made her decision anyway. She kept her horse. She insisted on the deed in her name. She walked into that marriage with her eyes open, not because she had no other choice, but because she had evaluated the choices and made the best one available to her with the information she had. That's not passivity. That's intelligence applied under pressure. What happened between them afterward was not magic. It was the slow accumulation of small, honest actions. Owen listening when she spoke about the cattle. Mercy fixing the latch no one else had bothered with. Owen remembering the clothesline she'd mentioned once, weeks earlier. Mercy showing up to the ledger and giving the right answer about the depot contract. These are not dramatic gestures. They are the actual substance of a life built alongside another person. The daily willingness to show up, pay attention, and do your part without keeping score. I think the reason this story lands the way it does is because it's really about what happens when two people decide to be their best selves in the direction of each other. Owen could have stayed at the broken spur and let someone else's land go under. Mercy could have carried her resentment all the way through and never let him in. Neither of them did. They each brought something. Steadiness, honesty, competence, patience. And they kept bringing it, day after day, until what they had built was something neither of them could have built alone. That's not luck. That's the result of choices, made quietly and consistently over a very long time. The lamp burns steadily. That's the line I keep coming back to. Not a fire, not a blaze, a lamp, steady, enough.